All right, family, it's your brother Assad back again with part three of the South African American mental health dialogue that took place January 9th, 2022. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so that you'll be notified when we drop new content. Secondly, in terms of housekeeping, I always gotta thank my South African family for all the love and support you guys have shown this channel, and by default, my family, my wife, and my children. We really appreciate it, and everyone else that supports the channel. We really appreciate that. I hope you guys are enjoying this discussion. Part one and part two were phenomenal. Part three and part four really dig into the heart of the matter, the cultural implications of apartheid and Jim Crow, the implications of culture on mental health, right? And these particular traumatic experiences that Black South Africans, colored South Africans, and African Americans have, these shared similarities and these shared traumas, and how that may affect our mental health. It has been a phenomenal discussion. I thank our panelists, Ompile and Brian, for their expertise and the participation in this panel. And so this is part three, and there's part four, and then Adrian and I will be back with a reaction video and some more great content. Once again, thank you guys for your support, and see you soon.
In the DSM-5, but we understand exactly what it means. In South Africa, there was apartheid. How do you think these traumas have affected the mental and emotional health of those who were victimized by it, and how do they recover? And somebody mentioned Henrietta Lacks, very important. How do they recover from these specific traumas, these racialized traumas, mental health traumas? I believe Frantz Fanon would say that it is that white supremacy is a mental health illness made into a political system. So when you have a mental health illness like apartheid, or you have a mental health illness like Jim Crow or slavery made into a political system, right? How do the victims then deal with this trauma generation after generation, and how do they heal and move on? I don't know if that's the best way to frame the question, but I think you guys can see where I'm going.
But go ahead, Sister Ophelia. I'll let you go first. Sister, I've been going first.
Okay. All right. I think, when we talk about the trauma of apartheid in South Africa, there is the group effect, and there's also individual effect. So I will talk more in the group effect without overgeneralizing. And in that way, I'll also try and address that from a number of perspectives of the different groupings that we have in South Africa. We talked about how we are a diverse society. I think when we talk, aside we're talking mental health, and we didn't quite go into defining what mental health is, and I think we just have a common understanding of what that is. But I want to just refer, as I address this question, to the World Health Organization's definition of what mental health is. And they refer to mental health as a state of well-being. And I think well-being, broadly defined, also is about how you perceive where you are in life, whether you're happy with your state. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that, such as, for example, whether your needs are met. And we could go even into Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we talk about that well-being. Where in the hierarchy of needs are you finding your own struggles? And how is that trauma that you are experiencing actually affecting your everyday living experience? And for a lot of South Africans, talking about well-being, okay, maybe let me just finish the definition of mental health. A state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her potential or abilities. Being able to realize your potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can work productively and fruitfully and make a meaningful contribution to their society. Those are all the elements that are included in the WHO's definition of mental health. And for a lot of people in South Africa, talking about and bringing it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a lot of Black South Africans that are still trapped at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're still grappling with basic needs of shelter, safety, food. And I'm glad because I was watching Dr. Asad, one of your videos, and you talked about your visit to Alex. And I'd be very much interested to just get to know what your impressions were, other than just the culture and the wonder of the people and how wonderful South Africans are. But if you look at the living conditions in Alex, for example, how does, in terms of this definition of how does one then begin to realize their own potential within that environment where your own humanity is, the conditions under which you live are dehumanizing, where you find that people are having to share spaces, living spaces in a small shack with a lot of other people. How does one's ability to cope with stress, to work productively and fruitfully and make a contribution, how do you begin even to do that when you're still grappling with those very basic needs? So one of the impacts that apartheid had was to create that mental trap really for our people in terms of not being able to see beyond their current status. And yes, there are many people that have made it out of those communities. There are many people that have made it, but it's very few people that would have been able to overcome those living conditions and being able to rise above and be able to realize their own potentials and make a meaningful contribution. And at some levels, many people are making that contribution despite. And I think that speaks to the resilience of the Black South Africans as well. I think there we must give ourselves credit in terms of how people have coped. Then we also then talk to the middle class in South Africa. There's a different type of mental trap that I think people may be, and I'm very cautious here not to overgeneralize, quite honestly, but the mentality of wanting, now you've escaped, right? You've met the basic needs, but there's a mentality of wanting to catch up fast, wanting to accelerate your catch up, because there's the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I think we really cannot divorce mental health from the socioeconomic factors that govern the society that we live in. So there you have people that have been able to psychologically put themselves above the system, but now they are faced with how quickly can we close the gap? But despite all this, and then there are those who have reached perhaps what you would call, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that self-actualization. And I think also there's a different set of mentality. It's always said that, when you've been oppressed, you kind of learn the behavior of the oppressor. And especially when you've learned to then beat the system, there's a psychological there's a mental set that you adopt, that I've worked so hard to get where I am. I've had to overcome so many hurdles. I've had to do whatever that I needed to do to get to the top. Yet you find that what we as South Africans then have is an expectation that once you've made it to the top, you've got to open doors and and level the playing fields for other Black people and make it easier for them to come in. But at that stage, what brought you actually to get to the top traps you in that you become more like your oppressor as well. You kind of, and it's a normal phenomenon that once you've overcome the system, it kind of you adopt that type of thinking process. So there's a lot of different challenges that different people in the different pockets of life that we in South Africa live in, that are at an emotional level. There's a lot of anger that is experienced by our Black people that have particularly suffered from apartheid. And if for South Africans that are viewing right now, if we look back at July, what happened in July, what was supposed to be a political protest that turned out into an economic looting, it was exactly an expression of that anger, of that frustration, of that learned helplessness, of how do we get out of here? How do we get out of this system? And if we look at it from that point of view, we shouldn't be surprised that what happened in July actually happened, because it really was an expression of what people are feeling, that anger of disappointment that after 25 years, yes, we were angry at apartheid, we fought against the apartheid system, we overcame it, but now there was hope for a number of years. But now the hope that we had is not realized because this government is not able to deliver on what it promised. Only a few people have been impacted positively. So I think there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of the issue of inferiority versus superiority between Blacks and whites. We're trapped in that, and it will go a long time. It will be a long time before that is actually addressed. And I think it might be addressed in the generations that are coming. But for those that have lived the apartheid system, when you get into any space, whether it's in the corporate space, whether it's in a shop, at the shopping mall, Black and whites, when they see each other, they come from different perspectives. A white man comes from a superiority position, and a Black man is coming from a consciously inferior position, but consciously trying to prove a point that I'm not inferior. There's always that, it's a constant battle of, I always have to prove a point. And people that are in the corporate world are constantly having to work with that, constantly having to prove I deserve this position, constantly having to prove I'm competent to do the job, as competent as that white person. Whereas competence, for example, would be easily afforded to a white person before they do anything. But you as a Black person, you have to prove that you can. And I think that's also even displayed in how our own Black people, for instance, when we go to services, points of service, that you still find some Black people who will give white people a better service than you as a Black person, because that mentality of inferiority and superiority is so entrenched in people that have lived through the apartheid system that is difficult to actually get out of. And we do have our newer generations that have not lived through apartheid, and they don't have that understanding. And so it's difficult. The anger for them is not understanding, the impact of the past as they are living it right now. They know the system must be different. The system must give them a different experience, yet they are always having these pushbacks and having to fight battles that they are not aware of. And that's also building up to anger in our young people. And I think I'll leave it there. One can say a lot in terms of the various emotional and mental impact that apartheid has, which were quite, I think we're quite serious, and it will take us quite some time to actually work through them.
I want to jump in here. I see there are several people with their hand raised, their hands raised. We will definitely be getting to your questions shortly here. We'll let Dr. Turner answer this question. And there's one more question that I want to ask, and then we will get to the questions in the chat from individuals. I just want to make sure that I recognize that we do see you. But I want to respond to Ompile right quick. And Brother Easy, who is on this call, took me to the Alexandria Township. What I saw was state-sanctioned inhumanization, right? Beautiful, beautiful people. I had a great time. Ezekiel, or Easy, his nickname, he's an OG, right? Everybody knew him, so there was no problem, right? That's his community, that's his home. I have a friend of mine from Dallas, Texas, and if you guys see some of the videos of us riding around New Orleans or whatever, New Orleans is a very impoverished place. The infrastructure is old, the homes are old, and the roads are old, and we have a lot of poor people. Right now, I believe the number right now is hinting at about 60% of Black males in the city of New Orleans are unemployed. And this is a result of not only COVID, this is prior to COVID. At one point, the unemployment rate for Black males in the city of New Orleans was 52%, right? So COVID has now exacerbated those numbers. So we are living in an impoverished city. But I have a friend from Dallas, Texas, who said, man, so the way our communities are set up, I'm sorry I'm going around so long with this answer, but the way our communities are set up, you can be on St. Charles Avenue, one of the richest, most affluent areas in the city of New Orleans, and then 2 blocks away, you're in the ghetto, you're in the hood. And he said, man, how can they live 2 blocks away from all this affluence and it not, ill affect them? Like, they're trapped in this poverty and the wealth is right there. It's 2 blocks away. We have to walk by it to go to school, right? We have to walk by it to catch the bus. So I felt the same way when I was in the Alexandria Township. I was like, Santon and Rosebank and all of these nice areas are right there. They can see it, and they are now trapped. So that's why I say it's state-sanctioned inhumanization. It's state-sanctioned, government-mandated dehumanization of a population, right? To where they are no longer seen as being fully human, and it affects their ability to be motivated to do certain things. Like, I want to get out of the situation. Now, when you mention about individuals who then make it the individual who makes it to the middle class or the upper middle class, Fred Hampton said, without proper political education, the oppressed will take on the means and methods of the oppressor, right? And it's the same my wife always talks about. Adrian, Amize, I can't even say it. What's his name? Oh, you could.
Aimé Césaire.
There we go.
From Martinique, from the Caribbean.
I'm not good with names. So, but he talked about going back to his homeland after being learned and educated in the West, and how he was riding on a bus next to his own people, and he had this look up. If you want to get your mic from, oh, I'm sorry. He had this look up, this gust, and I guess he was looking down on his own people because he had been trained in the West, and for some reason he began to feel that he was better than the same people that he had grown up with, the community in which he come, because he didn't get proper political education. He got a Western education. So we, as those of us who actually go on to university, go on to get the education, there has to be a counter narrative that is given to us. I got mine in the church. I got mine from Malcolm. I got mine from a Black conscious family that said, oh, no, you're not better than these people just because Negro, you wouldn't got a degree, right? So that was one of the reasons why, and I'm sorry to run over, but that was one of the reasons why I really appreciate Easy taking me to the Alexandria Township and taking me out of Santon, taking me out of Rosebank, and then brother Ronaldo taking me to Soweto and taking me to El Dorado to see the real people, as Sly Stone would call. My wife hates this. As Sly Stone would call everyday people, because I'm everyday people. I didn't come from gated communities, as I said before. The only gated community I've known is when the white man locked me up. But Dr. Turner, you can jump in.
So one of the interesting concepts when we talk about trauma is the understanding of like this, not just the psychological effect. It becomes economic. It becomes a social, the cultural effect, right? I sent Brother Scott and Sister Ophelia, I sent y'all the article by Dr. Lillian Comas-Diaz. And so the term that's often used is Stockholm Syndrome.
Mhm.
That's the psychological process by which a person will take on the values and ideals and cultural mores of their oppressor, and not just take those on, but they will then apply those same practices to the people that look like them. And so that's the number one effect of what trauma does. It really literally causes those of us who can escape the trauma to, in essence, join with the oppressor, because that's what happened here, especially when we talk about slavery, Jim Crow. New Orleans is very famous for its ability to have colored people, Black people who could passe blanc, who could pass for white. And it's a very simple concept. I teach a class called Black Psychology, and I ask my students at the beginning of the class all the time, if you could come back white, would you? And they were, oh, no, I love being Black. I said, no, I didn't ask you if you love being Black, because I love being Black too. But if you take for what you know about the world we live in, and you were given a choice in coming back, would you choose? And usually across the semester, I start having to say, you know, Dr. Turner, I remember you asked that question. You're right. I would rather come back white. I say, and once again, it's not about a lack of love or desire for who you are now. It's a recognition of the impact of trauma. The human condition says that we are all seeking to avoid adverse, uncomfortable, and hurtful situations. That's what Maslow's hierarchy of needs gets at, right? Is that we can't get to the next level if we can't supply that level we're at. So if we think about trauma, the very cusp of what trauma is that it causes us to not be able to fully develop for who we are. When we think about this, and I don't have the notes with me, and I didn't think about this for this question, but Dr. Naim Akbar has a book called Akbar Papers in Black Psychology, where he actually has 6 principles, but one of them I know. He says that we should all be free to fully develop in our humanity with others who do the same. That's what trauma does. Trauma stops us from being able to fully develop. So that's the answer to that question. How does trauma affect us? And I think a couple of the persons in the chats were asking that question. That's what happens, right? So that one individual, those group of persons, that family, and I don't know about South Africa directly, but I think it's the same. But we oftentimes have family or cadres of individuals who are able to negotiate and navigate the systems and become affluent and become, you know, whatever. We know New Orleans, we got the Mercadales, we got the Moriels, we got the Jeffersons, we got all
naming names now, Doc. Don't be doing that naming names on the people.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not scared, but okay, I won't name names. But they see me, they see I'm out here. But the point being is that, but those are individual groups and families who've been able to negotiate the system, and they do okay. I mean, actually, I'm a part of that. I have family who've done that, right? But the point is, that's what happens. People find ways to do okay, but how do we address this in our practice? And so as I listen to my sister, one of the things that I've realized is that, and I don't know about y'all, but I'm a movie buff. So if you watch The Matrix, and I have to get into this new thing about The Matrix because the brothers became sisters, and so I don't know about that part. But when I think about The Matrix, it's the red and the blue pill. The idea is that everybody's not ready to be fully informed about what's happening in and around them in regards to this trauma. Some people I want to recognize that this system is still operating to keep people oppressed. That's why in the United States we have the Candace Owens, we have the other Black folks who are down with this political agenda and they don't believe these things happen. And that's fine, right? But the reality of it is that in my practice, I try to allow people to become, and this is the word I'm gonna end on, consciousness raising awareness process. I try to give people the space to where they can raise their consciousness to where they can become aware of these things. And then as they begin to engage them, they can bring them out in therapy. So the more conscious they become of what things impact them, what things limit them, then we can start to fine tune their practices, what they do, how they approach it, who they are in commune with, how they take care of themselves. As Sister Phile was saying in regards to mental wellness, mental health, like they can strengthen that. And then, man, brother, side, we haven't been in the gym in a while, both for COVID reasons and time and space, but it's just like we work out our bodies. You have to work out your mind. You have to work out your mental health. You have to work out your spiritual, your mental wellness. And so the stronger you become, the better equipped you are to handle those moments where something kind of comes at you. So for me, that's how I address in my practice. I try to feed people along so that they can take on better. And when they get hit with that, they can say, oh, now I see what that means. I understand now why that affected me. In a very small space, I'll say this. I had a client who was dealing with some oppressive issues on their job. They did not want to recognize it as being racially oppressive. And so I stopped bringing it up. And so I would feed them little things and get them to talk about it. And so one day, someone white said to them, you know, they don't like you because you're Black. And it blew this person's mind. And it wasn't because they didn't want to recognize it. It was because it took a white person to say, why are you not upset about this? So then that person wanted to address it, which was fine, because therapy is not about me. It's not, I have no ego in therapy. So when that person finally wanted to deal with it, we then could build on all of the little kernels of stuff I had given so that now they were ready. And then they took it on. Well, they were able to access the system, access legal representation, access the system to work for them in that moment. And so that's how I address it in practice. And that's, once again, going back to, we have to understand the cultural individual aspects, but also the larger system, so that when the person wants to deal with it, we can help.
Thank you guys so much for both of those responses. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, and sorry for that. Asad, I just wanted to add the last part in terms of, because I didn't cover that, in terms of just some of the things that I would do to address that, especially at individual level. Obviously, we don't have in therapy the opportunity which we need to create. I will take that which we need to create to actually address at group level. So we work with individuals. And when we're dealing with trauma at an individual level, what are we really dealing with? We're dealing with pain. We're dealing with that anger I was talking to. We're dealing with the frustration of not, how do I get out of the system? So I think more than anything, it's, and I always, it's empowerment, right? It's empowerment of the mind for somebody to believe that they can actually go over or rise above their current circumstances, that whatever that they are able to conceive, if they stay hard at it, if they actually do make plans and implement plans and keep knocking on what may seem to be closed doors, they can actually make it. And I think one of the things that I normally refer to when it comes to particularly the apartheid system, and I know a lot of us South Africans and some of us around the call would have an opinion about the truth and reconciliation process that we went through. And I think for me, it was a very critical process. It may not have yielded 100% what we had expected of it, but there was a lot of healing that happened because people got to know the truth, people got to find closure, because one of the stepping stones towards healing is finding closure with what happened, coming to an acceptance of what happened, and being able to put it behind you. Because for as long as you have not made peace with something, you have not come to the acceptance that this has happened, you're still carrying the anger. That anger can actually cloud your thinking, cloud your... Anger can be, maybe let me just say this, that anger can be used constructively, but in the majority, it's more of a distractor, because it keeps you entrapped and unable to actually see the future and be able to work towards your future. Anger, if it's channeled properly, because you are so, like we were when we were under apartheid, that we fought against the system and had to make sure that we get out of there. If channeled correctly, it can lead to positive outcomes. But in most cases, especially at individual level, it clouds everything through which that you experience. And being able to make peace with what led to the anger, the pain that you experienced, and being able to let it go will free you to be able to move forward and be able to create a new reality for yourself. Believe in yourself that you are capable, that you are able to achieve the objectives that you set for yourself. But for as long as we haven't healed at an emotional level, I think that's what may keep some people trapped in the system. So letting go of the past, focusing on the future, being able, and I think part of letting go of the past, forgiveness, is a big part of what needs to happen. And I know when I talk forgiveness, a lot of people will say, oh, what are you talking about? But yeah, it is a necessary part of moving forward, making peace, and then being able to let go of the past so that you can free your energies for more creativity, for more positive, creating more positive outlook and positive emotions that add to your mental health.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to get into some of these questions that we have in the chat, questions, comments, and stuff. I just want to touch on what Brian mentioned. He mentioned like Candace Owens. I was thinking Larry Elder. I said, man, you know what? Trauma is just the proof. Those individuals are just the proof that white supremacy can be ventriloquized through Black people. It's become the mouthpiece of white supremacy.
And what that is, it actually gets into what we call, in some other work I do, a self-hatred paradigm.
Yeah.
It causes individuals to do just what it's just was talking about. Individuals no longer want to identify with their culture of reference. And as you were talking about, Brother Asad, the gentleman who had to recognize his own disdain for his own people. And so we oftentimes have to recognize that that's a part of what this trauma has done, is that it makes us, in essence, see our own selves as less than. And I think that's another huge part of, once again, what we've talked about today, just what I'm gathering as I'm learning, we have to remind ourselves to advocate in these spaces that people still need help. And as Sister Ophelia said, like one of the things, actually, this is huge to me, what I just thought about. That's one of the reasons why in America we still struggle, is because we have yet to actually have that healing process. So the South African, through Bishop Tutu and through Brother Mandela, both of them just huge men, and obviously we just lost Bishop Tutu, but that was a part of that ushering in some of that work. And as we see in the chat, we still have to work on it, but we have yet to have that. We finally had Clinton, who apologized for slavery, but that came with no real teeth. But now we have the erosion of voting rights. We have this new era of white nationalism in America. We have this new era of, practices of, once again, eroding voting rights. And of course, we continue to have these killings of African Americans at the hand of police. Once again, I reference what they call this article. At the same time, the United States in 1999 was trying to say that the Soviet Union and other countries around the world were violating the rights of its people. They found that the United States, Amnesty International found that the United States was the #1 violator of human rights of its people in America, in terms of African American, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, and then poor whites. So once again, we've yet to have that healing process. We've had that yet to have that reconciliation, and I think that's another part of that trauma. And that Sister Ophelia is saying, as long as we don't have that process, we can't heal.
And something I want to jump in here. Sometimes my South African family, they're very hard on themselves. They assault themselves and say, we haven't, this hasn't happened. First of all, I've mentioned in the video as Dr. Turner, they've actually had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Whether everyone was happy with the outcome, it was the government's way of saying, we are going to move past this point and form a multi-nation, a multicolored democracy in which our goal is equality and inclusion of all people. May not be there yet, but we are going to, this is our goal. So there's that clear breaking point from the days of apartheid into a republic, into a democracy. The United States has yet to have that point. And I think that's also the result of the majority versus the minority situation. We're still the minorities in the country. And someone asked, about, how can you heal when you're still around the individuals who actually traumatized you? You're still under the systems that actually, created the trauma. And I want to move, because we have one more question I want to ask before we get to the things, before we get to the actual chats. And I still want to be out of here at noon. At what point do we kind of redefine or take over the definitions of these terms? We use words like trauma. So coming from like a cultural anthropological perspective, we know that it is best for the individual to define. If you're doing an ethnography, you don't define what someone means. You allow the group that you're studying to define itself. So we're using words like trauma. Often say, they will define the Palestinian movement in Israel as a resilience movement. And that is not what it is. It is not a resilience movement. It is a resistance movement. And when you use the word resistance, you must understand that you're resisting something. There is some type of force that you are actively working against. When we talk about Black people in America being poor, that is very different than saying impoverished. The word impoverished means to be made poor. And if you are being made poor, then there is someone or some systems that is making you poor. So how do we redefine some of these diagnoses? We mentioned post-traumatic slave disorder, almost like this side piece it's not really a disorder, but how do we then say, well, no, this may need to be in the DSM-5. This may need to be a part of this manual. We need to start having diagnoses that come from us as we define. So either one of you can take that, and then we'll get into the final question.